If you walked into class with a bloody gash on your head, you would draw immediate attention and concern. People would rush to help you. Why then are wounds on the inside different? Well, for starters, people can't see them, obviously. But also, even if they could, a lot of people wouldn't take them seriously. And too often, even the people experiencing the mental wounds don't take them seriously themselves. But with rising levels of depression, anxiety, and stress, perhaps it's time we all start looking at emotions and feelings a little more seriously. A lot of people might not even understand the connection between depression, anxiety, and feelings, and that's not surprising because a lot of people don't really know how to define feelings. It's unfortunately not something that's taught in our curriculum, and again, not something taken very seriously in a lot of medical circles, unfortunately. I believe that should change. I believe that we as a society are long overdue for a major paradigm shift where we should look at mental health just the same way that we look at physical health. We would not expect somebody to carry on with their lives if they had a gaping head wound, and we should not expect people to be able to function to their optimum ability with a wound on the inside. And so I have a proposal that I think would really help everybody with this issue that is affecting everyone, whether you know it or not. Even if you're not suffering from it personally, someone you know or love could be, and it affects everybody. These ripples echo through. So, in order to enact this paradigm shift, what I think is in order is to change policy where our government should enact a rule that all schools should add emotional health and hygiene to their curriculum. So I think that in this speech, the best way to illustrate and define how we can do that would be to start with defining what exactly emotions are, since, like I've mentioned, a lot of people are terribly confused about how that even begins. And then we'll talk about adaptive and maladaptive ways of processing those emotions. And then we will talk about one teacher who is already implementing mental health and mindfulness approaches in her classroom and how we can learn from that and possibly build onto that for our future curriculum. So we will begin with defining emotions. Emotions are basically your body's response to stimuli. And it is your body's like a set of reactions, whether it be from an increase in heart rate, in temperature, in sweat production, tears. It's just a huge physiological set of responses to different stimuli. And we have positive responses towards things that we want to move towards or approach. And then we have negative responses to things that we want to avoid. And so that is kind of the nature of emotions, but it is defined very well by the primary expert from my speech, Mr. Greg Henrique. He says that emotions are a central part of core consciousness and that emotions provide information about one's goals and needs. So, pretty much what I was saying. And what we will know now is that there are different ways of processing emotions. And there is the adaptive way and the maladaptive way. But it's easier to explain the maladaptive way because that kind of shines a light on what makes something adaptive. So, maladaptive processing, according to this expert, Greg Henrique, would be number one, a failure to understand what emotions are, but we should be covered by that now. Number two, excessive inhibition and denial of negative emotions, often coupled with self-criticism in an attempt to force the inhibition. So basically, that just means that the more you block off those feelings and the more you suppress them, the more they build up. And eventually, whenever you have something getting more and more backed up, it's going to overflow. And that's whenever you see these outbursts that people have where it just seems like the smallest thing sets them off. It's not that small thing. It's all of the little emotions that they have been repressing that have built up and that are now coming out and are now potentially making this person have a really hard time with everything. So another example of maladaptive processing, which that brings me to, is an excessive, underregulated display of emotion after attempts to block or inhibit fail. So we all have experienced that probably at some point in our lives. Hopefully it wasn't you, the person having the meltdown, but it probably was. We've all been there, and that's okay. So that kind of shines a light on what adaptive processing would be. And according to Greg Henrique, this PhD, who has that PhD in the theory of knowledge itself, so his ideas on adaptive processing would be, number one, an effective awareness of emotions, defined and conflicting. Number two, fostering attunement to feeling states and the information regarding needs and goals provided by them. And number three, adaptive regulation of impulses associated with strong feelings, with long-term goals, and with ways of being. So, to translate all of that, we'll start with number one, the effective awareness of emotions, defined and conflicting domains of consciousness. So, the conflicting domains of consciousness comes from the psychological theory that there are three minds within each person. There is the experiential mind, which is feeling everything head on and taking on everything. And then there is the personal mind, that is your own narrator inside of your head explaining things to you and narrating things as you go. And then there is the public self, which is the you that you share with the world. So basically, whenever you have the experiential self, your private self is judging that. And so if you're judging yourself harshly, that can hurt your experiential self and kind of start a feedback loop where you feel bad for feeling bad. A good example is to think of how your cheeks might burn with embarrassment whenever you say the wrong thing. And then when you realize your cheeks are burning, they burn more. And then whenever you realize that, you start to sweat. And you have this cycle that builds on itself. That's kind of what maladaptive processing is like and what it does to you, how whenever you turn against yourself, you have this battle within your mind. And so we have to learn how to get away from that by finding a sweet spot between acknowledging that our emotions have valuable insight they can provide, but they also need to be mitigated and brought back down to earth with what is appropriate for our long-term goals and our life's needs. So there is a teacher that is already practicing this kind of things in her classroom. Her name is Patricia Cadigan. And what she has done is provided special chairs and all kinds of seating areas for her kids, so in her classroom rather. So they have small chairs, large chairs, soft chairs, hard chairs, private chairs, open chairs, all kinds of places where they can really feel anything they need to feel. And they're also encouraged to have private journaling time. And they're also encouraged to have mindfulness breathing exercises. Just these three little examples are ways that children are being encouraged to assess their own feelings, and that will encourage them to think about the feelings of others. So I feel like that's a really positive step forward. In the words of Ms. Cadigan herself, she says, emotional processing is the ability to identify how we're feeling and then controlling how we respond to those feelings. This is important because a key part of helping students become aware of their own feelings and the feelings of others is to build activities into classroom learning that support the emotional processing of students. So she says it best that we will help, we can help kids the most in this way, and that by helping a kid understand their own feelings, that teaches them to think about the feelings of others. And in this way, we have the ripple effect of our children teaching us after we teach them. And I think that's a beautiful thing. I got into this subject because I had my own mental health struggles. And so it's really powerful to me to learn how to understand my own emotions and how to process them. And hopefully, after this little talk here, you can do that too.